welcome to our session, the first AfA Connect of 2024, the release and rehabilitation of, the release of rehabilitated wildlife, where when contemplating and planning releases of rehabilitated animals, there are numerous dimensions that need to be considered, from the welfare and fitness of the animals themselves to environmental concerns and the important aspects of people around the areas where animals may be released. Between meeting guidelines, finding the financial resources, to permitting and finding reliable information around the successes and failures of other programs, there are numerous obstacles to overcome. Today, we will highlight some of the considerations and projects being undertaken across Asia on this challenging topic in efforts to share knowledge and catalyse conversations. So today's event will be brought to you by myself. I'm the lead coordinator of the Sanctuaries and Rescue Centre Coalition, and I'll be joined by my colleague, lead coordinator of the Macaque Coalition and Deputy CEO of Animals Asia, Brooke Aldrich. This session here today is a two-part session brought to you today by two of our working groups. The Macaque Coalition, which is helping to unite advocates and practitioners to discuss the challenges and solutions to one of Asia's most misunderstood and persecuted species, and the Sanctuaries and Rescue Centres Coalition, where our aim is to support sanctuaries and rescue centres in their efforts to help wildlife across Asia. Today's event will be broken into a couple parts. Part one will look at the broad challenges of release with considerations and lessons that can be extended across species. We'll then have a very quick break before moving on to part two, which will take a special look and specific look at the challenges of macaque release. After our final break, all speakers will return for our panel discussion about the challenges and considerations we need to make when releasing rehabilitated wildlife. Reminders to any of those who are joining us today that you can place your questions into the chat box for consideration for us for our discussion at the end. So we'll start with part one, of course, which is the broad challenges of release with some fantastic speakers. I'd like to first invite Thuy Nguyen from the Indo-Myanmar Conservation Asian Turtle Program to speak about their programs in Vietnam. So Thuy, if you'd like to share your screen and start speaking whenever you're ready.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Elliot, for introducing and inviting me to join as a participant and speaker for this online talking. Today, I would like to share our topic about the turtle release conservation in Vietnam. Everyone see my screen again?
That looks great.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm Thuy Nguyen. I'm the animal manager of Asian Turtle Program of Indo-Myanmar Conservation. Our organization have been working in Vietnam since 1998, and we have some main long-term project in Vietnam since 1998 until now, starting with the Turtle Conservation Center based in Cúc Phương National Park, where we working on response of the rapid reply of the turtle population in Vietnam to the illegal wildlife chase, where we rescue, rehabilitate, and release the turtle. And then we expand to the institute research on the two critical endangered species of the country called Sian soft-shell turtle, the largest soft-shell turtle of Vietnam, only live in southern China and northern Vietnam. And the second species is a Vietnamese pond turtle, the endemic species living in central Vietnam. And then now we also working on the big-headed turtle species and bow-headed turtle. Besides that, we also have many short-term projects on the other species as well. And our work focus, besides of the rescue, conservation, breeding, and release, we also do research throughout the country to study and understand about the distribution, ecologies, and also the threat to the different freshwater turtle and tortoise of the Vietnam. And from our knowledge, we increase the awareness for the population, for the communities, and young generation in Vietnam. Also, we work with the government agencies to recommend and also provide information on the level of the protection for the species and upgrade the species international law. At our Turtle Conservation Center, we are providing care for the 22 native species, and we having 2,300 animals at the center at the moment. Since 2015 until now, every year we receive 200 to 300 animals from 14 to 20 different species. So the special of the for the facility to rescue and also rehabilitate for the different species in Vietnam is really high, and this is our first and also the only turtle and tortoise rescue center in the country. Just focus on this group of taxa. Along the country, we also have many different local facility on rescue animal and turtle, but they also mix with many different other species, not only the turtle or tortoise. And our resources in the time also focus mainly on the rescue session. So we focus on the rapid response for the confiscation from the local authority. We bring the animal from the confiscation area to our center, prepare for the facility, equipment, and staff to bring the animal there, and then we put animal in the quarantine area for minimum 3 months before we reallocate animal or release them. And during the quarantine periods, we also provide triage, healthcare, and also treatment for the animal, especially to remove the parasite from the animal in the cage, because many confiscation not only include one single species. Many times we have even more than 10 different species or mixing with the mammal and other reptile species. And after that, we provide the intensive care to rehabilitate for them at our facility. So you can see on the screen, we have picture various species come to the center, and on the cell, they have the white pen marking from the local authority who identify them and also put them on the investigation case, and they make a list of them. And so when they arrive at the center, we also have them to remove all the marking from the local authority, checking the body condition, and checking if there are any disease, or especially later we also provide the genetic screening to determine if it's a pure species or hybrid species. And after the quarantine periods, we start looking for the option what we can do with these animals. Either we can, if they are healthy and the body condition is good enough, we can start thinking about where to release for them, and we do the habitat reviewing. Mainly the habitat assessment we collect from our field research data, and also from the other sharing from other NGO working in Vietnam, if they have any field record of species in the wild, and literature reviewing. And after that, we plan for releasing implement for the release, and some of our priority species where we can have some resources, we will do the monitor post-release, but this requires a huge investment, so we cannot do for all species at the center. And in recent year, we are glad that we can improve our techniques and also capacity to provide a better release process, and also monitoring for the turtle by provide the microchip implanting and the skin for every single animal we release in the wild. We also conduct some survey to do the threat assessment surround the protected area where we plan to release a species. We also do the genetic screening for some species which have a complex subspecies that cannot be done through the morphometrics distribution. and also health screening for the transmission disease, for example, mycoplasma and herpesvirus. Also, the animal welfare is considered as a priority at our center, from the handling step, caring for the animal, provide the equipment for transportation, especially for the long way, because Vietnam is also the long countries, and some releasing trip we have, it takes us from 40 to 48 hours to arrive the release location. So we have to consider with transportation, with condition, we can bring animal to limit the stress and further for the animal. Also for the carrying during the jungle is another condition that we consider, which equipment with supply we can bring to provide the comfortable for the animal, but also easy to carry in the forest. We have been also collaborate with many local stakeholders in protected area and other NGO to increase the successful for the releasing, and also about our knowledge on the habitat and species protection. And also we select multiple sites to release different species, so the chance for them to survive in the nature can be higher, and we can also use that to compare the result of the release in future. And in recent year, we have done the bio checking for two priorities species in our center. It's a big-headed turtle and bow-headed buck turtle. And here you can see the chart is number of the turtle and tortoise we released from our turtle conservation centers in 2017 to 2023. More than 30% of them are the big-headed turtle, which is also very critical endangered species in the country. And the second one is the keelback turtle, and the third one is the bow-headed buck turtle. And through the 7 years, we have been released 905 turtle from 12 different species in the country. So average, we have 100 and more than 100 animals released a year. Compared to the number of animals we receive every year, is about 40 to 50% of the animals that can be released back in the wild due to many different reasons of the condition of the animal, and also of the suitable habitat and resources to bring animal back in the wild. So here I will give two examples of the two species we have done release in Vietnam. The first one is the project called Reinforcement Population of Keelback Turtle. We have done in Cooper National Park in 2004 to 2005, back in 20 years ago. At that time, we have the project to put the bio transmitter on more than 12 wild individuals as a control sample, and we put 3 animals for individual from translocation, rescuing at the center. And after 1 year releasing, we find out all 3 animals from releasing still survive after 12 months. And compare with 3 other wild animals, we can see that this is mostly all the Haas release turtle, so we don't have the soft release, and we can see the release turtle move further distant than the wild turtle, and their behavior in the first year is slightly different to the wild animal, with the shorter hibernation duration, and also it takes time for them to adapt with the new environment, so they also lose more weight than the wild turtle. From that result, we keep releasing that species until recent year. Unfortunately, we don't have more resources to monitor them again. But this is one of the plans that we would like to do in near future, when we can have more finance support for the keelback turtle. And the second species we have been done recently with most of them in the center is big-headed turtle, with more than 300 of them releasing in the wild. And we have the project monitor the species in Puma National Park and Puhu Nature Reserve in Thuy during the COVID years. So we have done in November 2019 to October 2021. And we put the transmitter on to monitor 11 individuals. At this time, we have no control sample because the release area we decide to be separate with the wild animal and create the different population to compare and control the sample. And after 2 years monitoring, we find that 4 animals survive. At least 4 animals survive after the 2 years, and the problem is this is the aquatic species. So we also have 10 times that our transmitter device falling from the 8 individual, and this is the result that only 4 animals found after 2 years. It also could be our technical issues that we couldn't monitor all of them. And this is also the first project that we follow close to the IUCN guideline on the translocation and conservation. And we took by all the steps to reach to the successful of the releasing this species. This project also bring up the capacity for the local people and young conservationists in Vietnam to involve with the project. And also the first project we do the last genetics screening for more than 400 of animals and screening for all of them to determine if they have pathogen they have pathogen disease in the body or not. And all of them get the microchip and mark notching on the cell. Besides the release undertaken by us, there are also many different releases in Vietnam by the local authority and other organizations. And these are some pictures I found on internet in Vietnam that they say about their releasing. And we still see that we still need more support on the identification, because you can see one picture of the Sungata tortoise being released in the protected area in Vietnam. Multiple species have been putting together to release in one location, and there's no habitat assessment or risk assessment been done for those releasing. That's why we would like to work more in Vietnam and have supporting all other rescue centers to increase the capacity and also connect together closer so we can do better releasing. However, there are big challenge because of many species. There are no protected area for them, and the main thing is also lack of the data and knowledge on the species ecology and distribution in recent years. So there's some history area, the habitat area we've been surveying in the past. Now it's been destructed or changed so fast that we is not suitable for the release at the moment anymore. And yeah, and I think it's happened to many other NGOs as well. It's a limited finance and resources is a big challenge for us because it's hard to do without the support to do more survey or to do more screening for the animal. Assessment from illegal wildlife trade in Vietnam is still not enough, and throughout the whole country, the facility capacity is still very limited. And besides that, the cost for other for the DNA cost is always high, and hard to do for the last number of the animal. And the last challenge we also been discussed recently inside Vietnam is about how we can public activity on social media after the releasing, that people also want to say about what they have been done so they can get better support in future. But the public thing also can be potential risk for the animal right after the releasing. So this is one considering we would like to discuss in our discussion panel later today. In the conclusion, we would like to say that the releasing for conservation purpose is really important step to help increasing and restoring the wild population turtle in Vietnam, which have been seriously reduced in the wild. However, the most introduction activity are not considered and evaluated very carefully, and there's no detailed procedure on or instruction on the turtle release process in the world, and most of the release studying will need to be conducted in longer periods and also need larger sample size to compare and evaluate. And before closing my presentation, I also would like to share with everyone one of our questions that I have been wondering how to balance the resources for the release procedure regarding to the also other requirement on genetics analysis at the moment, because there's so many genetics specialists come up with new paper public and more requirement on the genetic screening and to the subspecies level. So how we can balance that and continue to support for the releasing under the pressure of the rescue and trade situation in Vietnam. Thank you everyone for listening.
Thank you so much for the insight from your programs, Thuy. Just looking at your presentation, there's the incredible amount of individuals that you look after at your center is insane, and the potential scale of trying to get all these animals to be released out to the wild. We'll certainly add that last question into potentially the panel discussion at the end, but you've raised some really good other questions that we can consider talking about after, which is, you know, your first program meeting IUCN guidelines with the big-headed turtle, but also the other releases that I've heard, you know, many times through talking to rescue centers, is government agencies and other people releasing animals into the wild that haven't had full assessments and risk assessments, etc. done. So thank you for raising those issues, and thank you very much for speaking today, Thuy, and we'll see you at the panel discussion. And now our next speaker is Dr. Sian Waters. If you'd like to share your screen, Sian, and begin whenever you're ready.
Okay, I'm sharing my screen. Hopefully it will work. I'm going to turn my video off because I live in South Wales, and unfortunately our internet connection is very dependent on weather, and it always rains here. So I'm going to stop my video now so that you can hear me okay. Okay, where are we? Can you see that okay?
That looks good to me. It's just not in presentation mode, but that's fine if that's what you need to present in.
There we are.
Looks perfect.
Okay, thank you. Well, thanks very much for inviting me to speak at this very interesting event. I'm going to talk about the human dimensions of primate translocations, because basically, if you want a successful translocation, then you have to include people in the mix. And as the previous speaker mentioned, you know, people are involved or will be, you know, they're in the environment where we release animals. So I'm speaking as the Vice Chair of the IUCN SSC Primate Specialist Group section on human-primate interactions. I also work for a conservation project working on the only macaque found outside Asia, which is the Barbary macaque, and that's in Morocco. And I'm also a core member of the Human-Wildlife Interactions in Conservation Translocations, which is part of the Conservation Translocation Specialist Group. So I do have some actual practical experience of translocating wildlife. So I worked in North America doing rehab and release of black bears. I also worked on a project introducing a little fox, a prairie species, to the Blackfeet tribal lands in Montana. Those animals were captive bred, they weren't confiscated animals. And in Morocco, we have quite a unique situation, I think, where Barbary, after a few days after birth, and that baby that they adopt and look after, obviously the baby returns to its mum for a drink and stuff like that, but that baby that the male adopts isn't necessarily his biological child. So we do have a problem with the capture of wild-caught animals for the pet trade and for the photo prop trade in Morocco. And occasionally, the forestry department work with us to confiscate animals that have been reported to us. If they're of a suitable age and their behavior is okay, then we do actually release them into wild groups. And that has proved successful. There's an article in the bottom right-hand corner there that all these articles are available on my ResearchGate in case you're interested. And the males will adopt these infants. The groups that we work with in Morocco are not habituated animals and they're quite frightened of people. But if you go out with an infant and the infant starts crying and they see the infant, they will come down right into your face to try and rescue that infant. And then they will take it away. We're not always in a position to be able to monitor what happens to those infants, unfortunately. But you know, the one example that we have monitored did survive and was to at least 1 year old. So it can work. Okay, so let's talk about the reasons for translocating primates, or some of the reasons. We have, of course, the planned conservation translocations to reintroduce previously species that have been previously extirpated in an area. These animals can be captive bred or wild caught. There are examples of primates being released that have been previously used for biomedical research. Relocated endangered primates, sometimes in a protected area, for example, people perceive that there are too many of a particular species and they tend to like to move them out, or they would like to move them out. And then we've got relocating urban primates to other areas due to negative interactions with people. And then we've got the releasing of confiscated primates. And I think we're going to find out there's a number of different categories of reasons why that's done. So the Primate Specialist Group has got a number of publications on reintroductions. The first one, I think, was the Guidelines for Non-Human Primate Reintroductions, which is quite old now. There's really not very much in there at all about the human dimensions of translocation in wildlife. And then we have the Best Practice Guidelines for Reintroducing Great Apes. There's a fairly lengthy paragraph on the human dimensions of that, but mostly it seems to be focused on the health implications for reintroducing great apes. And then we have the guidelines for the rehab and translocation of gibbons, which does mention the human dimension, and we'll hopefully hear more about that in the next presentation. So why should we be concerned about people? Well, sometimes we're all very aware that there's a lot of conflict with what we call human-wildlife conflict. And that often results from clashes between interest groups of people over conservation objectives or resources. And then you've got a lot of diverse interests involved: land and resource use, political affiliations, animal welfare values, and others that are reflected by these strongly held positions. Unfortunately, you know, it's the negative people-wildlife interactions, they're often rooted in the wider societal issues, power imbalance, governance, and historical inequalities and conflicts. They're never as simple as they may appear. And I'm sure you've all experienced this. I think, you know, people talk a lot about coexistence, and I don't think there is ever a situation, and probably has never been a situation, that there has been total peaceful coexistence. I think some conflict with wildlife, or the conflict about wildlife, which is often what these interactions are about, is inevitable. Now, unfortunately, in some instances, you see a very nice monkey rehabilitation center in India, and this is to move animals that are causing a problem in urban areas, in this case, rhesus macaques, to a rehabilitation center. And then they're released, they're sterilized, and then the primates are then released into forests. Now, what's been happening is that some of ethnic minorities who live in areas where the forestry department want to clear out people, if you like, because it's a tiger reserve, excuse me, they release these large numbers, sometimes 100, 200 animals, into the forest near the villages of these ethnic minorities. They don't consult or inform. And obviously, sometimes these, well, often these ethnic minorities or tribal people are dependent on the forest for their livelihoods. They collect forest products, etc. They probably look after the forest better than the forestry department. But the problem is that sometimes when these animals are put into areas where they don't seem to have occurred in the past, they cause a lot of problems within the ecosystem. And in some instances, of course, they're very aggressive. This isn't, the way to go about things. It seems, or it may be a tactic of the forestry department to try to pressure these people to relocate outside the area and of conservation interest. So people aren't going to always view these translocations or releases or whatever you want to call them as positively. I'm going to read you now, because some of this stuff is very uncomfortable. There's not much stuff published or available on people's perceptions of reintroductions and releases, not for primates anyway. I'm going to read you a little bit from Violet Shrier's field notes, which is this paragraph here of this paper, that only the orangutans get a life jacket. And this research took place in Indonesia and Borneo for orangutan release rather than macaque release. It seems only the orangutans get a life jacket, Bapadini comments sarcastically. Together with a crowd of villagers, we observe a conservation organisation prepare for an orangutan release in a national park in Indonesia and Borneo. With the help of men from the village, conservation workers load 5 heavy metal cages on local boats to take them to the release site upriver. To protect them in case of an accident, floats are lashed to the sides of their cages. Whether local people die or drown doesn't seem to matter, Bapadini continues. I'm confused about why they waste so much money just to save orangutans, another woman comments in disbelief. Can you believe they pay 1 million rupiah per boat? The villagers struggle to make sense of the release. They, the orangutans, belong to foreign countries that hire local people to take care of them, Bapadini reasons. What is the benefit for local people? Another person asks, and continues laughingly, not bad if they could become a meal. Now, obviously, the NGO who organised this release, that was not at all their intention, to upset or cause ill feeling amongst local people. It never is our intention. But we have to be aware that, people don't view wildlife the same way that we do. So we have, because the group that I work with on the Conservation Translocation Specialist Group, we don't think that there's enough work or enough information about how to facilitate human-wildlife interactions or during and after conservation translocations. So we've written a paper in Frontiers, which is free to access. I'll put the website to that in the chat after. And so I think, we have to understand that trust building and clear communication is key. We need to pay attention to the power dynamics, past, personal and perceived, because there will be a lot of history in the areas wherever you release animals. Informing the communities is critical, and that's whether the project is international or locally owned and managed. Be clear what you're doing in the community and talk to people about it. And I think you'll find that if you have a local forum where people can voice their concerns, then you get a better reception. For any of our work in conservation and animal welfare, I think listening is the most pro-conservation behaviour you can practice and can foster positivity towards your work. Okay. The other thing that's quite difficult to get your head around, I think, is our positionality. We need to become used to identifying how personal aspects of our education, background and identity impact on our work. We are products of our culture, and that kind of, has a huge influence on how we see the world and how, for other people, how they see the world. So listening to local people and listening, to the way that they gossip about us and spread rumours about us, because that's very important stuff, enables us to understand how our presence may be understood. And I think finding out how we and our organisations' intentions and actions are viewed will enable us to behave with increased sensitivity. It's possible, highly likely, that you will be seen as the person or NGO responsible for the primates release, meaning that people will come to you if the primates cause problems. So, for example, in Morocco, we are strongly identified with the Barbary macaques in the local forests there. And so if anything, somebody from outside comes, for example, to try and poach some of the infants, then we get calls immediately from local people to alert us. But if the animals crop forage, and they talk about our macaques when they alert us about somebody coming to poach them, but if the animals crop forage, then they become our macaques, i.e. the NGO's macaques. So, people will perceive animals, they will maybe have two different perceptions at the same time, if you like. I don't ever think that people aren't complicated. We all know that they are. Okay, so be aware that the people living in the release area may not view the return or release of primates as positive and may retaliate negatively towards the animals. So this is from a paper we published in 2022 about decolonizing primate conservation practice. It's a case study from our work in North Morocco. And these are the kind of points that we feel were important, in the development and delivery of a conservation project. We have to acknowledge that we share history, we share with people living in and around conservation areas, and we need to be prepared to learn about their historical ecology and their past by listening to them. An awful lot of these people, they're vulnerable groups in that they're marginalized, they're often discriminated against, and we need to pay particular attention to people who are vulnerable and marginalized. So research and confront the effects of colonial history, find out how local people view us, our employers, the organizations we associate with. That's sort of being perceptive. I'm not going to read all these out because I'm running out of time now. I think be informed, emphasize how understanding of human and human-primate relations and cultural values is vital for achieving sustainable biodiversity conservation. This is very much aimed at conservationists, but there's an awful lot here that you can take away as animal welfare practitioners. So a lot of you probably wondering how on earth you collect these sorts of data. I mean, my preference is to collect qualitative data. As you can see, there's quite a lot written on orangutans. We've also got a reading list on the Human-Primate Interactions website, which talks about methods of collecting these data and specific to regions, human-primate relations in Asia, Africa, etc. And we've also got a section on inclusivity and ethics. Chua et al.'s paper is free access, as is Shriya's paper. Unfortunately, the books are not. But I would recommend that you read. It's quite difficult to get your head around. Anthropologists are not easy to read sometimes. But I think it's to get an idea of how differently people can perceive your activities is never a bad idea. Trying to get an idea of how people perceive what you're doing can only be helpful in the long term. Okay, I'd like to thank Owehan Zoo Foundation for supporting our work on the section for human-primate interactions, and I'd like to thank you for your attention. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Dr. Sian. That was a really great oversight to a really important consideration that many people may not actually put so much thought into. I think one of the best quotes you just said is, listening is the most pro-conservation behavior you can practice. I thought that was
Elliot, you've gone on to mute.
There we go. Of course, something like that's going to happen.
Just in the part when you mentioned listening, you went on to mute.
I said it was really great to get access to those resources there at the end, which we can share. But I think one of the most poignant comments you said was listening is the most proactive conservation behavior you can practice. And then also having an honest admission of the colonial history that many of these countries have, where people are trying to do work and encourage work with people in the region, and the perceptions they may have of this. So I think they're two really important aspects. So thank you very much for raising those, Dr. Cheyne. And now we're moving on to Dr. Susan Cheyne. It's wonderful to have you here. We wondered that you got you in the room finally. There's a few struggles there, and it was a bit crazy under the water there. But whenever you're ready, please share your screen and introduce yourself and start.
Brilliant, thank you. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are. Apologies, my laptop decided it was not going to play the game. So after this amazing conference, I'll be going to the laptop shop to get it fixed. Hopefully, can everybody at least see that first slide?
That looks really good.
Yes.
Fab, thank you. Can I get rid of that? Hide. Yes, right. So yes, my name is Susan Cheyne. I've been working with gibbon rehabilitation and release 1999, good grief, in various capacities. And I'm also the vice chair of the IUCN Primate Specialist Group section on small apes, where I work to bring together everyone that's doing work on gibbons, be that wild rehabilitation centers or zoos, to try to push forward what we know about gibbons and make sure everything is up to date. And we do have a best practice guidelines for gibbon rehabilitation and translocation, but it's now nearly 10 years old. So one of the activities of this year is going to be to update that. Happily, none of it is incorrect, but there's obviously a great deal we've learned in the last 10 years. Not the least of which is 10 years ago, we did have, but we didn't recognize the 20 species of gibbons that we have now. However, of those 20 species, 3 of them don't occur in captivity. Sorry, that's the Hainan gibbon found only on the island of Hainan off the southern coast of China, the Skywalker gibbon or Lok Tianjing found in eastern Myanmar, western China, and the Cowvit gibbon, northern Vietnam and southern China. Everything else is impacted by the illegal wildlife trade, much of which, unfortunately, has moved online, as well as still occurring, of course, in in live. And ultimately, I mean, suppose this is the kind of the key point that I want to go through, as well as some of the detail about how we do this and lessons we must learn, which I think some can apply to other species as well, is that this needs a huge working together to deal with this epidemic of online trade, particularly because a lot of it is happening within the countries where the gibbons live. Obviously, gibbons are leaving their country of origin and traveling across international borders, but much of the trade, of course, starts within the country of origin. And the problem is getting more of 11 countries where we find gibbons. There are now only 3 that do not have a rescue center, and that is Brunei, Myanmar, and China. Unfortunately, in the last 18 months, Bangladesh, an NGO in Bangladesh had to set up a rescue center because the pet trade is becoming increasingly problematic there. And many countries, including Indonesia, have much more than one rescue center for gibbons. So yeah, most rescue centers across Asia have had or currently have gibbons, even those in particular who may focus on other species like orangutans. Gibbons will often come in, and gibbons require specialist veterinary treatment and behavioral rehabilitation. It's not simply a case of receiving a gibbon from a confiscation, checking it over a little bit medically and taking it to a forest and opening the door and saying, "May the force be with you," and simply returning it to the wild. That will fail. Equally, some approaches that have taken place for, again, orangutans don't work. Taking orangutans to forest school, they tend to stay close to the human caretakers. Gibbons would run away. They do run away. I won't discuss this enclosure design tool in too much detail, but thinking about ways that we can actually support rescue centers to develop enclosures that really, really, really support gibbon rehabilitation and focus on their behavior and indeed their unique anatomy. Now, until the SSA was able to partner with the Orangutan Vet Advisory Group in 2018, I think was the first time, where we were able to bring together vets and managers from gibbon rescue centers to join OVAG, but also to share information specific to gibbons. And we have got a project starting this year. And I think I've got every gibbon rescue center across Southeast Asia on a WhatsApp group. But if you're here and you're not, please let me know, because we have funding to push forward a gibbon health monitoring project, because there's a great deal of knowledge gaps in what we don't know about health and disease, both in wild and captive gibbons. But we need to have regular meetings, and we're having 2 at least this year with OVAG in Indonesia, and then save the date sometime in October for the 5th gibbon husbandry meeting, which will be in Malaysia. So as I mentioned, this lack of knowledge about gibbon health and diseases, in particular, some of the bigger ones, we're not certain about malaria, particularly not certain about TB, which is obviously an issue. Hepatitis B, there certainly appears to be a wild gibbon strain, at least in Javan gibbons. Very uncertain about the other 19. Herpes simplex, we know, is when triggered, it can be fatal to gibbons. Emerging diseases and other things like skin conditions in these 2 examples, we're just not sure. We have huge knowledge gaps. What we must do when receiving a gibbon is we have to address basic welfare. So that's reducing stereotypic behavior, reducing the incidence of human-directed behaviors, in particular masturbation or sexual presentations. And absolutely critical to gibbons is socialization. They live in family units. That socialization, that pair bonding is critical for the adults, but also the socialization is so important for the youngsters to try and relearn how to be a gibbon. Understanding the causes of psychological issues and stereotypic behavior is again critical, because not all stereotypic behaviors have the same origin. The poor conditions under which the gibbon is kept, the isolation from other individuals, stress and trauma. So in many cases, simple changes, large cages and providing a companion gibbon will significantly reduce these, but it has to be looked at, it has to be monitored. Again, with social adjustments, we absolutely have to pair at least the adults. The cages really should not be in visual range. These are highly, highly territorial species. We know this. Yes, fine for them to hear each other. That's how they're going to relearn how to sing and duet and call, but they shouldn't be in visual range in any place. I've seen zoos where gibbons are in visual range, and that's not good, because it is going to cause stress. They're going to see each other all the time, and that's going to increase the stress. When we're supporting behavioral adjustments, big, tall, high cages, get the gibbons off the ground. You know, if they're happy, if you can build in a forest that occasionally floods, that will definitely encourage them up. Build the cages into the forest again, so there's as much natural substrate as possible. It also allows the gibbons to forage in the forest, not only for leaves, flowers, maybe fruits, but also insects. And keep the changes, the enrichment in the cages, change them as frequently as possible. I do understand that is a financial constraint, but you know, the environment gibbons will be in the wild is constantly changing. We need to provide them with that training before release. And of course, make sure substrates have some flexibility so they can build up muscle strength and build up balance. Again, critical for when they return to the wild. Diet, of course, the food should ideally not be prepared. Gibbons should have to work for it as natural as possible, bearing in mind, of course, constraints, as I mentioned, allowing the gibbons to forage around their cage, make sure you know what species are there, that there's nothing toxic. Yeah, and encourage the gibbons to manipulate the food. And there's lots of different diet information in the best practice guidelines that are free to download, and are in most languages where gibbons occur. This is an example from a project in Thailand, a prototype of a remote feeding system, with the idea that obviously this would be created into a longer system, whereby gibbons who are really at the final stages before returning to the wild, to really focus on that, breaking that association between humans and food. So that once the gibbons are released, ideally they're going to be released into a large area far from people, but you do not want to release any animal of any species that might eventually come out of the forest seeking food and come into a negative interaction with villages, local communities. So we've come up with this basic sort of checklist of what a pair of gibbons need to be doing. Again, we only release adults, and ideally a pair bonded pair. They should be up at the top of the cage. Positive pair association, so duetting, copulating, grooming each other, showing all the signs of a bonded pair. Brachiation should be the main form of travel. They shouldn't be on the ground, and no severe stereotypic behavior. And again, there's more details about these in the guidelines. And then release. However, choosing the release site is critical. You don't want to be reintroducing gibbons, or indeed any other species, into an area where they're likely to come into severe contact or conflict with their own species. Gibbons are highly territorial. If you do that, there will be fights and there will be injuries. Equally, you want to make sure that returning, in this case gibbons, but any species, back to an area, or even introducing into an area where they may not have been in the past, has no negative impact on the animals, birds, etc., that are already living there. Which means you must do a minimum, certainly in the gibbon case, of 6 months surveying of the habitat, so looking at food availability before release, checking what other animals is there. If the population of gibbons in your chosen release site is still high, adding new gibbons into that is probably going to cause a problem. You're going to push that area of forest above carrying capacity, meaning that all the individuals there of gibbons and other species that rely on fruit, bears, orangutans, other primates, you're going to cause a problem. The nice thing with this graph is what I'm showing is that if you find the right release site, actually, and the process is done correctly, gibbon rehabilitation works. In the blue in the front, and these are from two slightly different habitats, so it's not an absolute perfect match, but basically released gibbons, released into the right environment, their diet, what they would eat, will become very similar to completely wild gibbons. This is the purpose of rehabilitation, is to return these animals to the wild, where they can perform all aspects of behavior, diet, etc., as similar to the wild as possible. So it can work. It can also not work. This was the very first pair that I was involved in the release of. And after we released, in this red bar, yes, for the feeding, resting, and traveling, so these very broad categories, fairly similar. Unfortunately, the social and singing absolutely plummeted, but we knew why. The gibbons, because of a variety of reasons beyond our control, the gibbons were released immediately after being brought to the release site after quite a long period of travel. They weren't allowed to acclimatize together in an acclimatization cage, and they were immediately released. So they separated for a few months and then came back together. That's now all been rectified. Again, the learning from the mistakes and sharing what didn't work is critical in this process. So I've mentioned, I'm not quite sure how much time I've got left, but I'm not too far from finishing. the guidelines are just guidelines, but they are put together, at least in 2015, by everybody who was involved in gibbon rehabilitation at the time. The revised version, again, everybody involved in gibbon rehabilitation will be invited to contribute. So it is put together by experts. And what some of the things that we need to add is, you know, how a little more that we've learned about how we assess pair options, looking at the bigger problem that gibbons are actually fairly resilient. So finding totally empty forest that is ecologically suitable to release gibbons is really challenging. So maybe we need to rethink the gibbon process, that what we're actually doing is adding gibbons into areas where the populations have become extremely low, rather than only focusing on areas where there are no gibbons left. Genetics, welfare, exactly when to repair, information about hand rearing, and sharing success stories are all things we hope to put into the new guidelines. We need a lot more information about potential translocations. So that's the movement of wild to wild. Certain countries, India, Bangladesh in particular, you have families living in literally 2 or 3 tree patches. Those are not viable. And from a welfare perspective, not viable either. We have to think how that can work. It's high risk. There are boreal species, and there's potentially 5 individuals that you need to capture. We need more work on that. And rewilding from zoos. Now, at the moment, the section on small apes and everybody is basically of the opinion that this is not the best use of funds. Yes, it can work. But at the moment, there are so many animals, so many gibbons in the trade, that the focus should be on the animals being traded within country, rather than bringing individual gibbons back from zoos outside of gibbon range countries. It should be looked at on a gibbon by gibbon basis, or species by species rather, and certain species might be more suitable for this rewilding than others. But as a blanket, just get all the gibbons outside of Indonesia and other countries back is not necessarily the best use of funds, given the extent of the trade. So I think, oh yes, and translocation, the reasons behind it, this incredible fragmentation, forcing gibbons to the ground where they're coming into contact with potential predation by dogs, coming into contact with parasites they might not otherwise come into contact with. So there's certainly much more discussion needed to have on translocation in particular situations. So yeah, we need, I think this is my last one, we do need to continue updating what is post-release monitoring. It is simply unacceptable to be returning animals to the wild without following them for a period of time to determine their success. Are they even staying alive? What can we do to support compliance with guidelines, not just NGOs, but also government? You know, although they are just that, they are guidelines, but they are put together by the experts. And, you know, the challenge of the time of maintaining the guidelines is keeping up to date. We're fairly fortunate for gibbons that there's a lot of people involved and who are willing to contribute. I know it's going to be more challenging for other species that have much even broader geographic ranges. So I think that's it. Get involved, International Gibbon Day, contact me with anything, especially if you have gibbons in your rescue center and you're not currently on the vet project WhatsApp group. And yes, go gibbons. Thank you very much. That is it. I'm going to stop sharing.
Thank you so much for that, Dr. Susan. And yes, go gibbons, of course. I think one of the best points you made there is reporting what isn't working. And that's something that's been brought up with us in many discussions across multiple species with multiple rescue centers. Is we all like to report our successes, but we're not often reporting failures enough. And even for something that seemingly, and no offensively, is happening really well for gibbons from the look of it. You know, it's a very coordinated group. And considering the huge number of species out there, it's a huge challenge to make sure there's enough information about successes and failures out there so that people can refer back to. But thank you very much for joining us today. Everyone, no worries at all. We're going to go to a very short break now for about 5 minutes, and then we'll move on to part 2, which will look specifically at the challenges of macaques. So thank you everyone for joining us, and go make yourselves a coffee.
Can I just mention, please stay in this room. Like don't leave the breakout room because we're just going to resume exactly where we are. I mean, of course, unless you want to go to the other session, but if you want this one, stay here. We're going to start part 2 of this session, which is going to take us from a broader focus on different aspects of release to a bit more of a narrow focus on projects that are currently releasing macaques under very differing conditions. Our speakers are Chiara from Free the Bears, Femke from Jakarta Animal Aid Network, and Jeremy from Lao Conservation Trust for Wildlife. And I'm really looking forward to hearing what each of them has to say. We're going to start with Chiara. Are you ready to go, Chiara?
Yes, I'm ready.
Excellent. You can share your screen.
Can you guys see it?
Yep, it's not in presenter mode yet, but yeah, there you go.
So, hello everybody. I'm Chiara, and this slide is not working. Okay. I'm the technical advisor for wildlife release for Free the Bears. Who we are, as you can guess from our name, Free the Bears, we mainly free the bears, and we are an international NGO that is devoted to conservation and animal welfare. And we rescue more than 1,000 bears since 1995 when it was founded. And we currently have 4 rescue centers in 3 countries, Vietnam, Cambodia, and Laos. In Laos, we have 2 rescue centers, of which the Luang Prabang Wildlife Sanctuary that rescue, rehabilitate, and release also other wildlife species. In this list, you can see the permanent residents that we have, and of which the 19 pigtail macaque, of which 16 of them are our release candidates. So we choose this group because they are a cohesive and peaceful troop. And the first 2 were rescued from the pet trade in 2016, and the last one joined the troop in 2023. All of them come from the pet trade, and we have 9 females and 7 male. What are our objectives for this release? Of course, we want the macaque to go back to do their job in the wild. So we want to reestablish the species service to the ecosystem in a protected area nearby our rescue center, because we need to contrast the habitat degradation and we need to promote the value of the area. Of course, economic, as many of the speakers already said, that the cost of keeping animal lifelong into sanctuary is one of the big budget lines for each rescue center. And of course, prevent using the same fund or facility to rescue more animals in needs. So that's for sure something that we need to do. And conservation, we are working with law enforcement to try to reduce the amount of macaque in the trade. We want to establish a new group, and we want to collect information about how the rewilding rehabilitated animals and their impact in the ecosystem. What are the challenges of this release? We have 3 main problems. One, we have a highly degraded ecosystem. Years and indiscriminate hunting and use of the forest without any conservation work doing in that place, bring the forest to be quite empty of any big vertebrate. There is a strong anthropogenic pressure, so there is a lot of cattle grazing, pig farming, non-timber forestry product collection, and a lot of hunting inside this protected area. And probably the biggest challenge that we are facing is that we are working with habituated animals. So all the macaque come from the trade, and all the macaque have learned that humans carry food. Our release area is nearby our rescue center in northern Laos, near Luang Prabang. I'm not going to pronounce the name because I can't, but it's a protected area of 353 square kilometers, and it's characterized by high mountain up to 1,300 meters, and a semi-deciduous forest between rock formation and rock walls. We surveyed the site 6 times in 6 different areas, and we identify a valley which we want to focus our effort. So we want to establish a project zone that is an area of 191 hectares, the yellow line that you can see here, and a core zone inside of that. So where we're going to have our release cage is this area is going to be a no entry zone, and we're going to have ranger station and ranger checkpoint that control the access to the area. So in the yellow area, people will be still able to access, of course, only to collect stuff permitted by law, not hunting. We're going to involve village and village chief, so we're going to hire ranger and community patrol. We are already having an awareness campaign running. I think we already did 4 villages, explaining people the wildlife law and what our projects are and how they're going to benefit from that. As I mentioned before, our biggest challenge will be for sure working with habituated animals. Many of you know that the main problem is that when the animal learn, especially smart animal like macaque, that humans carry food, as soon they will find themselves in the forest hungry, they will go looking for human settlement. And that normally end up tragically because the animal, or they get captured again, end up back in the trade, or they end up in a pot being eaten or killed, or they end up attacking human, causing problem and causing conflict, like raiding crops and stealing stuff. So how we think of how we gonna tackle this challenge? We enforce a no contact policy, of course, in the enclosure. Before, the keeper was calling the animal in the house to feed them, to check that each of them eat properly and to check on their health. Now they receive food from outside. The keeper are wearing for several months now a yellow jacket. That's part of the predatory training. So the animal, we want them to learn to distinguish between a human that bring food, so a keeper, and a human that don't bring food. That's why the yellow jacket. And we change the diet. We want them to get used to wild fruits that are normally way less sugar than the human fruits, and to recognize the thing that they can find in the forest. So we start feeding them only or mainly with wild things that they can find in the wild. We're gonna do behavioral and physical assessment before, of course, moving them to the pre-release cage. And to avoid that they will go looking for human settlement, we're gonna supply them with supplementary feeding. This is, for now, is a forever idea. I mean that we're gonna feed them as long as it's gonna be necessary to keep them in the area, to be able to know they were about, and to prevent them for moving to the nearest village. This is a model of the soft-release enclosure. It's a multi-species enclosure because if this project will go as we wish, we plan to release other species. As you can see, it's composed. It's composed of 2 cages, so with tunnels, so the animal can get away from each other in case of skirmishes. And the red door are the one that we're gonna use for the release. So the animal gonna spend 1 month inside the release cage, and at the moment of the release, after the assessment, the red door will be open, both of them, so the animal can decide to leave whenever they feel comfortable, and we're gonna keep feeding them. Post-release monitoring. Unfortunately, we didn't have any budget for feed them with GPS tracker. That, as you know, is a very expensive technology, but is wonderful. No radio tracker. So we decided to try to experiment a marking method with the fur dye. So we use non-toxic dye for animal to mark different area. So on the right side, the female, on the left side, the male. The mark is going to be all black. The picture color is just to help understand where the marking goes. And we're going to have our daily patrol of ranger and community patrol recording the whereabouts and the individual that they can recognize from the marking. We know that the marking probably not going to last more than 3 months, being optimistic, but that's an experiment. And we're going to have camera traps setting down all in the project area to monitoring the animal and the activity, the human activity especially. And we're going to do a monthly troop assessment with me and my colleague going out to have a behavioral check on them. Where are we? For now, we are the preparatory phase. So we are doing awareness. The animal already have in place what is the they are already eating wild fruit, and they are ready. The keeper already wearing the yellow jacket, and we are going to recruit the field staff and training, and we are about to start building the cage. Our future plan is to keep monitoring, and we want to understand how well they adapt, because if this one work well, it can be a valuable solution to avoid to keep healthy and animal that have a good behavior and good health to keep them in cage, but instead having a semi-freedom situation in which they are protected and they are fed, but they are still in the wild and they still contribute to the ecosystem. So we're going to evaluate this project at 6 months and 1 year, adjust and see where we did wrong and where we did right. And then if it's a success, we wish to release more species like slow loris, gibbon, or golden jackal. I thank you for listening. I leave you with a comment about the two main approaches that I encounter in wildlife rescue center when it's about to release. There is the extreme cautious people that doesn't want to release anything ever because they are afraid, because they don't know if they will survive. And on the opposite side, there is who just think, okay, you got that's your second chance. Goodbye and good luck. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much. That's great. Sorry, I couldn't find the mute button. That's a great talk, and I look forward to the panel discussion later when we can pick your brain a little bit about some more of the stuff that's going to happen. I want to introduce Femke next from Jakarta Animal Aid Network. Femke, are you ready to share your screen?
Yes. Hi, everyone. Okay. Please let me know if you can see it.
Not yet, but it may be coming.
Oh.
Something's happening. Yeah.
Yeah, can you see it now?
We can see it now. It's not, again, it's not in presentation mode, but it's there on the screen.
Okay, 1 second. And now?
Oh, yeah. Perfect.
All right, thank you. Hello, everyone. My name is Femke Haas. I'm the co-founder of the Jakarta Animal Aid Network. We work in Indonesia to combat wildlife crime, and we are dedicated to improve the welfare of animals in generally. In Indonesia, there are many different rescue centers. There's many specific rehabilitation centers. Throughout time, we've set up 6 that are still active, and I helped co-found some of the rescue centers that are part of the first Indonesian rescue centers to be able to take care of confiscated wildlife. We work right now in the south of Sumatra, where we have a steady center to combat wildlife crime, and we take care of confiscated animals, and at 5 other steady locations. And we deal surely with a lot of macaques. These are some of the animals we right now take care of. So these are animals in the Sumatra Wildlife Center and also some animals in the Java Center. This doesn't include the center near Jakarta or Bali. But as you can see, like the biggest amount of animals we are caring for are the macaques. The long-tailed macaques are like a red line in my
Femke, have you gone on to mute? Suddenly I can't hear you. Uh-oh. Okay. No, can't hear you. I'm not sure what's happening. Can anybody hear Femke, or is it a problem for everyone? If somebody can hear Femke, please let me know.
There either.
Yeah, is it okay?
There
You're
you go.
back. Okay.
Oh, sorry. I think there's a connection failure. But so we work with a lot of different species. Last year, for the first time, we released also one group of pig-tailed macaques, which was planned very carefully. And yeah, as I said, it was the first time we were able to find a safe release site for them. So we finally managed to bring a group of pig-tailed macaques that were all rescued from the illegal wildlife trade to a safe forest. We work with different animals that are all confiscated from the illegal wildlife trade, and we have a canine unit. So we focus on the wildlife crime issues, and we try to detect wildlife that are being smuggled. And most of the animals we find are birds, so avian, and primates. And most of the primates are gibbons, sadly, and of course, in extreme amounts, macaques. So long-tailed macaques and also pig-tailed macaques. So we receive a lot of pig-tailed macaques and long-tailed macaques from this illegal wildlife trade that they can be detected during these smuggling actions. So in the port, at the seaport, at the airport, we try to check and find animals that are being smuggled. So we started ages ago. We started this rehabilitation project specifically for macaques. Actually, the first release we ever did was in 2006, and then we more specialized the facilities, and yeah, we built the facilities according to the needs of the long-tailed macaques. And I can share with you that it's been a very long journey, and we're still learning every day. So a primate rehabilitation program surely includes a lot of different aspects. We need to nurture them back to mental health, which is something that often is forgotten. Most of the releases that we see it has been mentioned also earlier by Susan, Dr. Susan, and by Ms. Thuy, that animals are being released by government officials because they just look at the general physical state and they're like, okay, these animals can go. And this is an issue we are also facing here in Indonesia. Well, actually, these animals need to undergo a long rehabilitation program where we also need to look at their mental health, and we need to socialize, for the macaques at least, back. We need to socialize them back into natural groups. And so we nurse them not only mentally, but also physically into good health before we can consider even to release them, because release is surely not always an option. And many of the primates that are in our care can never go back to the wild. So the rehabilitation process involves the improvement of the diet. Surely most of the animals that we receive have been very malnourished. So they need to have a proper diet, and we need to sustain them, extra vitamins. We have to give them the right facilities to be able to move, and encourage new foods, like so they can start to forage, which is extremely important for the primates, and to learn predator avoidance skills. Most of the primates that we receive, if they are long-tailed macaques, they've endured suffering that's unimaginable. It's you know, every time I see a case, I think this is the worst case we've ever seen, and then there's a worst case. So all the primates have had their teeth cut, and of course, with some primates, we can still intervene surgically, and they can still return back to the wild, but some will have yeah, will have an issue forever because they simply don't have any teeth anymore. But luckily, most of the primates we receive are quite young. And when they have cut the teeth, we can still intervene surgically, and we can still nurse them, the dental health back to such a good shape that they can return to the back to the wild. I mean, this is just one of the main issues we're always facing, the dental health of the primates that we are receiving, because they do cut their teeth when people keep them as a pet or when they use them as dancing monkeys. So most of the primates we receive are dancing monkeys. They used to be abused on the streets of Jakarta and other areas around Indonesia. They need to dance to earn money for their handlers. They need to do silly tricks, and they need to ask for money and wear a chain around their neck. And anyway, it's abuse in its worst. And we've been campaigning since 2009, and since 2014, it's been banned in Jakarta, and since 2019 on national level. These are the masks that the monkeys used to wear. And then we have the pet monkeys. So the monkeys, either the macaques are either confiscated as being a dancing monkey, or they have been pet monkeys formerly. And I have to say that the pet monkeys are way more difficult to rehabilitate than the ex-dancing monkeys for some reason. It's because probably the dancing monkeys fear people so much that they intend to grow more easily to other primates, where the pet monkeys have often been staying with people for so long that often we even consider them not to be a release candidate, because often they even don't really want to interact. They're mentally very disturbed, so they need a lot of extra attention when it comes to the pet monkeys. Then we have those that are confiscated from the illegal trade directly. So mostly those monkeys that have been poached are freshly from the wild. And when they are being smuggled, they're being confiscated. So these are monkeys that are still infants. They're still too young, and they need to be nursed 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, until they are strong enough to be around other primates. So this is a lot of work. But on the other hand, by doing so with just a very steady team of like 2 or 3, let's say, surrogate mothers, we managed to keep them wild. So they did grow into new groups that could be released later on. So we need to, of course, they need to undergo certain veterinary treatments and checkups. Many of the macaques we receive have had bullets, have bullets because they have been shot upon. Mostly these are the expat monkeys that were released by people, and then people would shoot them and, you know, see them as a burden or see them as a pest. Well, actually, these monkeys are scared and are looking for food. But yeah, that's one of the main examinations we need to do. Then surely the dental health, because they cut their teeth. And we do tuberculin tests. We had a lot of cases with tuberculosis with the macaques that were rescued. So this is a very big issue we're dealing with. And of course, parasitic tests, like we do stool examinations, because most of the primates we receive will be infected with worms or any other parasites. And then they have to undergo the quarantine process, which takes about 2 to 3 months, depending on the condition. But we need to rule out certain diseases that they could transmit back into the wild, or so we need to isolate them for a certain period of time. And here we check for all those diseases that could be very dangerous in the future. You know, could be transmitted into wild populations, for example. So we really need to clear out any forms of disease before we could even consider them being a release candidate. So yeah, like I explained before, most of the primates have worms or other types of parasites. So we just need to rule out all these pathogens, and then we start with the next challenge, which is when they can leave the quarantine and they enter the rehabilitation facility. This is where actually the magic happens, but it's also very intense for the team, because when the primates are placed into these rehabilitation cages, these are like special facilities in where the long-tailed macaques can form groups, and we try to do it in a way that it's as safe as possible for all the macaques involved. So avoiding fighting by introducing through fences through which they can't bite each other, because we've seen horrible things in the past. And we learned from that. So the fences are just a few millimeters, so they can't really harm each other, but they can start to groom each other, and they can start to get to know each other. And surely this process is very intense. Yeah, it's like it needs full attention of the team. We need to monitor them around the clock. And you need to also have some knowledge about the different individuals, because you need to understand, like, this individual will be an alpha, or this individual will probably be very low in rank. So you start with the ones that are low in rank. You start with the ones that have, you know, the less ability to become very aggressive. So you want to end the making of a group with those bigger adults, or the ones that sometimes the alpha male can be a softie, you know, so it really depends on the character also. So the cage has different compartments, and yeah, this is extremely important for the successful rehabilitation of the long-tailed macaques. So they need to be on a very healthy diet, let's say, like, you know, it needs to be very a variated diet. And we also introduce, while they're in rehabilitation, natural foods like crickets, insects, leaves. The team goes out and find leaves, and any type of food that they could possibly also find in the forest. And then slowly you see the transition, especially with like the pet monkeys that used to live with people. They are used to like eating rice and all these strange and unhealthy types of foods, and sometimes it's very challenging to get them to eat their natural diet. So you really need to monitor this very carefully, else you have another problem when they fall sick. So when they're ready and a monkey seems suitable to move on to the next stage, which is the socialization cage, then you look at the different individuals, and then you start with the lowest in rank or the youngest individuals, and then you start to form a group. And this is just like in the daily care of the monkeys. We need to, like, when we start socializing the group, we need to monitor them really well to see if everybody's eating, because, you know, the macaques have a hierarchy, and this is extremely important to be able to return them back to the wild. But when you're feeding them, it can be very challenging. So you need to make sure that everybody's eating enough and everybody gets enough nutrition every day. This is just the team working every day to care for the macaques in care. We aim to form a group as big as possible, of course, for different reasons. The bigger the group, it can be even more unstable, which is not what we want. So you need to be careful. But if the group is bigger, of course, it helps, because the more individuals you can release, you know, it's like it will save the cost. It's like it's a long travel where we're bringing the macaques to. So yeah, you want to make a group of at least 10 monkeys, but sometimes up to 20. Does that mean my time is always up because the timer is running?
Yeah, it means that theoretically you've got 2 minutes left.
Okay.
You can
So
take you can take 4 if you need them.
All right, thanks. So we relocate the monkeys to an island. We've considered different release sites, but we've found, and we're very lucky with this island that has pristine forest. It's a protected area. We did several surveys there. There's no, like, you don't want the monkeys to have any negative impact on the local fauna or flora there. And in history, they were existing on this island already. So what we try to do is we survey, we find the right location for release, and then we do the big relocation operation, which is the monkeys or the primates have to go in transport boxes, and we relocate them. It's about a 20-hour drive to the site from where they will then be on a boat, and then we bring them to the release site. Here are the famous life jackets that Dr. Sian was talking about earlier. I thought that was very interesting, because indeed we had these comments as well. Where life jackets, you know, are there for the cages of the primates, and then we didn't have enough for the team members. So yeah, that's something to take care of in the future. But so this is when the primates are leaving on the boat, and we usually we bring them in 2 different groups to do 2 different locations, for example, and they all have a coloration on their book, so you know who is with who, so you don't get any issues in the field. And then when we are on the release side, everybody will carry 1 primate on their back, and then the hike starts to the release location. Our team has been there already before the release. So we have a steady team that will go there and find the release location, which has been agreed upon with the authorities, of course, and has been surveyed previously. And then they will set up a pre-release cage. We never just do a hard release. I'm very happy that the word soft release keeps coming back also in these discussions, because it's just so important. We release the monkeys into these pre-release cages. And there it's very beautiful to see, because usually you start with the younger ones, just like in the socialization enclosures. And then it's always a bit messy, and they're always confused, and they're even sort of challenging each other and fighting a little bit. But as soon as the alpha male enters the pre-release cage, everybody's happy. So it's just so important to have this stable group, and it's beautiful to see. Then, of course, we do after release, like post-release monitoring. So the team that will bring the macaques will leave again the same day. Then we have our team there to do the post-release monitoring and to make sure that the group stays steady together after they've been released. We release them by opening the netting at dawn. So the team has to do the 2-hour hike early morning at dawn, open the cage, sit from a very safe distance, observe them. And then after dark, return to the camp, because you don't want the primates to follow us, to the camp. And then the team will stay there for 3 weeks usually, but it depends. Sometimes we need more time to monitor the macaques after the release. I think that was my presentation. Thank you so much for your time.
Fabulous, Femke. Thank you so much for showing us all that. It looks like a really good project to me. Again, we're going to have time to discuss it in greater detail in the panel discussion that will follow the next presentation, and everybody who's spoken today will come back for that. And in the meantime, let me introduce our last speaker for the day, Jeremy. Jeremy, are you ready to share your screen?
Yeah.
Excellent.
I can do that now.
I can see it.
All right. Is that good for everyone?
Looks good here.
Awesome. So yeah, thanks for having me today. My name is Jeremy. I'm the director here at LCTW, Lao Conservation Trust for Wildlife. And I'm going to talk about a unique situation that we were put in starting in the beginning of last year. So talking about LCTW's obligatory release of macaques, some of our beautiful animals here on the first slide. So a little bit about us, just like many other rescue centers, we rescue, rehab, and release wildlife. We try to do it the best we can according to standards, which a lot of people have talked about today. We also have a couple of conservation breeding programs, currently just in reptiles, elongated tortoise, Siamese croc, and yellow-headed temple turtle. And then we also run the wildlife crime hotline here in the country, 1601, which anyone can call toll-free to report wildlife crime. In terms of education and kind of impacting people, try to make it accessible for environmental education opportunities. We have done some government training programs, also local university student programs, and then we also have international and local volunteer opportunities as well. So just a very brief background on kind of what we're doing here in Laos. This picture is one of our baby elongated tortoises, and then this was our natural history museum when it first opened. So the problem, in January of 2023, LCTW got the news that we would not be able to continue to operate on our current land. As you can imagine, this was quite a hard pill to swallow. We were not prepared for this. To be honest, we did know that the lease was ending, so our land lease, but we were under the impression that everything would be fine and we would be able to extend it. We actually put in quite a bit of money into our center to change a lot of it, to improve a lot of it, I should say, both in terms of animal welfare as well as the education aspect. So when guests came, they would have a different experience here instead of what they used to have as we operate on the site of the old Lao Zoo. So we invested quite a bit of money. So we were quite surprised when we were told in January 2023 that we would not be able to operate at our current site anymore. They did initially give us well, the timeline was changed quite a bit. At first, they told us 3 months, which was impossible. At the time, we had around 400 animals at the site. So, I mean, you can imagine having to relocate that. And then from there, it then got stretched out to 2 years after some negotiations. And then from there, they then went back on it and they said that we only have 1.5 years. So it's kind of a lot of back and forth. At the end of the day, we have to move out by the end of June this year. So we have 4 months. And yeah, we are well on our way. But back to kind of the situation. So essentially at the site, many of our animals, over a quarter of our animals that we have were macaques. So many of them were inherited from previous organizations that were here, and the setup and everything was from them as well. So we had about 113 macaques at the time that we were told this. And so looking at how do we survive? That's what the question became. How can we make it so that LCTW does not die at the end of all of this? And how can we make it out of this alive? So one of the biggest things, and as well as our main sponsor was also quite adamant about, was reducing the amount of animals we have. And this also was quite an obvious answer because, as we know, animals take up resources, which is why we are here, I understand. But when you're faced with a challenge like this, you kind of have to make these hard decisions. So we were put in between a rock and a hard place, essentially, with macaques taking up a large amount of resources. And I'm not just talking about diet, I'm talking about manpower. Obviously, the amount of enclosures, we had 10 enclosures to house these macaques. Actually 13, but 3 of them were quite small and not so nice. And then just managing the groups, because as we've heard, the hierarchy system, introducing macaques that do not know how to macaque is also quite difficult. So everything about it was quite a difficult situation. So we started to have discussions about it, and we decided that, okay, macaques, at the end of the day, we need to release them because in terms of conservation, in terms of what we're doing, in terms of downsizing, having to relocate, building 13 enclosures just for macaques, all of this was kind of the talk around the table, I guess, when it came to this. So the solution was, at the end of the day, we needed to release these animals back into the forest. The reason we hadn't done it prior is because we wanted to make sure we did it properly. So we have always talked about releasing macaques because, as you guys know, they're very common in the pet trade. We have the same issue here in Lao, and we get reports of macaques all the time. So we have always wanted to start the rehabilitation and the release, but we never had the funding to do it. We never had the time to do it. So this was kind of like forcing us to make a decision, and really not the exact way that we wanted to, but at the end of the day, I think we did the best we could for the situation that we were put in. So one thing we started to do was to come up with the macaque protocol, just for our own center. Obviously, we took bits and pieces from all different types of literature that we could find. We actually had an intern who helped to work on this, which was great because he had the time to do it. So he was able to, scan through all of this. We reached out to a couple different facilities as well that were releasing macaques, seeing what they were doing. And yeah, so our release protocol just had the information that you see listed here, species information. We put in their veterinary information in terms of like what diseases do we want to screen for, are there vaccinations we want to give, our reproductive control, all of that type of stuff. When would we euthanize an individual and decide that they shouldn't be released? We also talked about release preparation, so looked at all of this stuff about diet, environment, dehabituation to people, predator avoidance, obviously ability to find food, all of this. And then the release site as well. So we did look at a couple different release sites around the country, trying to take into consideration some islands that we found, looking at how close nearby villages were, looking at whether the areas were protected or not. And so basically this protocol was kind of being put together as what's the highest standard we could do. And then essentially what can we do in the time frame we have with the money we have, and the manpower. So all of this kind of combined made a very obviously difficult situation because we did not have the funding to do proper soft release enclosures. We did not have the manpower to go down and do post-release monitoring. We also we have an entire new site to build. And that includes literally everything from electricity to water to new enclosures for the animals that we are able to take. We have to build a new hospital, all of that. So all of this is kind of, being tossed around, and risk analysis are being made and all of that to see what we're going to do, what we're able to do, and how we can do it to best suit the animals and their needs, the forest needs, and then also our needs as well. Obviously, we knew that euthanasia, like just a mass euthanasia, was not an option. It is obviously not something we wanted to do as well. But obviously that was something that we had thought about and discussed. So at the end of the day, we came up with, okay, we need to release these animals, and we're probably going to have to bring down the standards of which we would like to do in order to make this possible, in order to get the job done. So probably the biggest thing were the veterinary decisions. So after doing a risk analysis, and actually we talked with some of our other colleagues as well, is to look at the tuberculosis was the one that we found that we really wanted to test for in terms of screening them. So we had a list of all the other diseases that they could potentially hold, things that are zoonotic, things that could be passed to other wildlife, all of that. And we decided that, okay, tuberculosis is the most important thing that we need to figure out if they have or not. And we have had TB here at the site before. Luckily, it was only a small group of 4 animals that were infected with it. In order to test for TB, we did 4 different types of tests so that we could be as sure as possible that the animals did not have it. So we did the skin test, PCR, acid fast stain, and chest x-rays. And then in terms of the other health check stuff, obviously physical exam, age estimation, if we didn't already have a good estimation about it, because some of the information on the macaques that we did have wasn't full. Microchip, we did microchip every macaque just in case they were to show up in a market or we were to get their body or something, then potentially we could scan them and see. We know that that's a long shot, but it was still worth it to us. Photo ID, so we took more pictures of them, body condition score. We did ultrasound to check out, obviously, their insides and make sure everything looks healthy. They don't have any degenerative diseases or anything. Did x-rays, hematology. We also froze some serum for future research, and we also took hair samples. So these were all things that we deemed necessary before we moved ahead with the release. The last one being sterilization. So this is something that we talked about quite a bit in terms of the whole situation, because we knew that this was a welfare release. This has no conservation significance. This was purely because we needed to reduce the amount of animals that we had at our center, and this is what we had to do. So we did know that in our release location, almost all of our macaque species were there. So we did have all 5 macaque species that were listed on that cover slide. However, one species was not found in the area that we released. We only had 3 individuals of that species. But anyway, due to the fact that it was a welfare release, we did decide to sterilize all individuals. And so that is males and females. We already did have some males, well, all of our males either vasectomized or castrated at the center to stop any breeding, because obviously we did not need to breed macaques. And during this veterinary, or during all these veterinary procedures, we actually had vets come in from all over the world. Oh, that's quick. And so we had them come in to help us do all of these procedures, and we were able to get through all 113 macaques in 3 weeks, which was quite impressive, doing all of this stuff for every single macaque. So the release site, it was down in Nakai Nam Dun. We had originally thought about using this island here, but that was actually a bit closer to the village than we would have liked. So we actually released further up northwest of the area. And then that way it wasn't as close to the islands. And you can see a lot of those little river tributaries. Obviously macaques can swim. We know they can cross them. That wasn't the main reason, but it would be an extra hurdle to kind of get to the nearest villages. So that was one of the reasons that we chose this area. It's also a national protected area as well. So that helped. And then we knew that there were also rangers there nearby where we released the animals. And some survey work has also been done there as well. So that's how we knew what species were present. In terms of release, the travel, maybe not as far as Femke's travel, but we had about an 8-hour drive from our site and then an hour boat ride. This unfortunately was a hard release. We had, obviously, like I mentioned, limited time, budget, staff. It wasn't feasible to be able to do what we wanted to. And then we did these release trips in 1 month apart from each other. Moving forward, partnerships and planning. So we are only one of 2 rescue centers in the country, Free the Bears being the other one that you saw earlier. And one thing that we had tossed around the idea of was potentially having a waiting list of macaques so that we can focus on one group of macaques, rehabilitate them, get them out properly, and then kind of move through that waiting list. Because a lot of the macaques that we do get tip-offs about are actually someone's pets. So we can kind of put them on that list and focus on, okay, I'm going to take stump-tail macaques. I don't want to speak for Free the Bears, but maybe they'll take a different species, and then we can kind of work together to sort that out. And then that way, especially in our case, we're not just inundated with 100 macaques sitting around kind of for no reason, not focusing on one group, rehabilitating them, doing post-release monitoring and that. So at the new site, the goal is to make it a bit better. Well, a lot better, actually. And then perform all the necessary tests on intake. So we also hope to do all of that testing that we did for these macaques after the fact. We hope to do it before they're even introduced into the group, so we know that everything is ready to go, and then release them once the stable group is formed. So future releases, we hope to finalize our protocol. So like I said, we were making that protocol, putting all these bits and pieces in it, and then hopefully really make a kind of a streamlined protocol that we can follow every time, and really make sure that we're doing things the way we want to. Post-release monitoring, of course, it's what we want to do. I think we will be able to in the future. and then soft release as well. As everyone else has said, we know that it's critical in the survival of a lot of species once you release them, and we hope to be able to do that as well. So thanks, everyone. Yeah, I hope you enjoyed the presentation. It was a kind of a weird one in the situation that we were in, but I think, to be honest, I was quite happy with the way it went for the amount of resources we had, for the amount of staff we had, and for the amount of macaques that we had. Once we did release them, we did see them immediately start to go into the forest. As Femke talked about the adult male, it was the last one that we would release. And once that male went with the group, everyone kind of followed and did what he did. So that was also really nice. Yeah, I think that's it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jeremy. That was great. I think it's really important that we see, presentations about situations like yours when things are a little bit less than ideal, not exactly how you want them to be. And I think that type of situation will really inform the discussion that we will have in a few minutes. But so it's 10, well, for most people here, it's 10 past the hour, whatever hour it is. Let's take a very quick break, about 5 minutes. At 15 minutes past the hour, we'll start our panel discussion. But in the meantime, just go stretch your legs. Okay. See you all soon.
No, thank you very much. And I think you made the really good point is we probably are opening many, many more cans of worms here, but this is what these forums are about. I see Sian has her hand up.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I think, as I said in my presentation, the releases of confiscated animals, there are a lot of different categories for reasons for release. We've been looking, the section for human-primate interaction has been looking, because there's an awful lot of context in which primates are released, including, animals that are released after biomedical testing, which is pretty horrendous. That happens, there's a case for that happening in South America, actually, but not as far as I know with macaques, but, never say never. I think a lot of the guidelines, excluding Susan's, in fact, because she does talk about rehab animals, deal with the conservation translocations of captive bred or wild caught animals that don't particularly have any history. They're not confiscated then, put it that way, or in the majority of cases. I think we need guidelines, not just for macaques, but for other primates in different contexts. We don't live in an ideal world. So yeah, guidelines for nicely organized conservation translocations with lots of funding and sexy species are all very well, but I think we need, it's clear from this, the presentations we've seen that there are many different contexts in which confiscated primates are released. So I think it's something that we need to look at as a section, because what we tend to do is ask practitioners what they need, and perhaps there is a need here for not guidelines so much as recommendations. I mean, guidelines is a very, it's a kind of, prescriptive term. I think recommendations might work better because, as Susan said, there's no real perfect scenario where animals are released. There's always something different, and often because of the human context. So certainly I think, any recommendations for translocations have to include a massive section on the human dimension. Thanks.
Absolutely. I might just continue on from that, if you don't mind, Brooke, and it leads us into another question. I might direct it towards you, Thuy. You mentioned that this is the first time you've started releasing big-headed turtles with IUCN guidelines. You've got dozens and dozens of species in your rescue center. Where are some of the places that you find reliable and accurate information? Given that, we don't record failures. We don't often, mostly we talk about success, I should say. We don't often talk about failures. Where do you find your information to ensure your programs are the most well-informed, especially like you said, when there's very few sample numbers in some of the cases that are brought forward?
Thanks, Elios. Yeah, I think also a little bit due to the time limitation. I didn't have chance to share more detail on our example. Definitely, we still have some peril during our releasing. For example, the big-headed turtle. I forgot one information that we found 2 animals die after 3 months of releasing. So the pathos and the disappearance of the animal after releasing is happening, and the stress for animal also unavoidable. For us, the following the IUCN guideline is the process that we try, but we also know that our limitation cannot reach all the time. We lucky that we get funding for project with the big-headed turtle, which we can follow, and then we try to continue with other species too. And we understand that in terms of the many different species, sometimes it's really challenging to find the best place for them. So that's why we try to first is keep studying about them in our rescue center, and then the second thing is searching the suitable habitat for releasing, and be honest with our number and data what we're recording. Also try to collaborate with many other stakeholders, especially also the other NGO, where they also working in the protected area that provide the better protection. So hopefully we can bring the better chance for them to release in the wild. Yeah, a lot of lessons learned from the releasing, and we I think that one of the hardest thing for us is do all the health screening for the animal for the pathogen, because not only the mycoplasma and herpesvirus disease in the tortoise and turtle is appearing recently. The vet experts also recommend we need to do more for the adeno and virus, and also Rana virus. We find this is extremely challenging for us to have enough resources to do for all of them. This is that's one thing that we find that hardest for us. And the second thing is some species also the scientists find out that there's some how can I say difference even under the subspecies. So they haven't been split into subspecies yet, but the genetic experts also request us to do more on them and classify them, follow the class, different class. And this is one issue we are facing with the Vietnamese pond turtle, because we have nearly 1,000 of them at the center, and the amount of money to spend for each DNA sample is at least $50 US. And we have nearly 1,000 of animal, and this is very good topic today that bring up for us to chance to hear the idea from other experts or other people who also working on the turtle rehabilitation and conservation in the world and in the region. And yeah, I would like to hear more other people ideas as well.
Yeah, I think you're right. It brings it back to that very first point of, there's very limited resources available. And if you've got to spend $50 on every single turtle or tortoise you're trying to release, where do you actually, where do you draw a line? What is the minimum amount of testing that you can do to get these animals back out to the wild without having a detrimental effect on those individuals or populations in the wild as well? So it's a really sticky place for everyone to be in. But thank you for sharing that. Brooke, did you want to lead on to the next conversation?
Yeah, we've got a few different questions recorded that sort of revolve around similar themes, right? And one of them is, well, I think we know that there aren't macaque specific release guidelines or recommendations or whatever publicly available at this point. There are guidelines or recommendations for primates in general, I believe. There's the gibbons that we talked about. Although Sean did actually mention context-specific recommendations, which I think would be an interesting angle to take. But I'd be interested to know, those of you working with macaques, do you think that what really specific things do you think would apply to macaques more than any other? You know, what would the differences be in macaque guidelines as opposed to primate guidelines? And mixed in with that, have any of you got experience with working with governments, you know, governments who are sometimes obliging releases to be carried out, working with governments with such guidelines in mind or with such recommendations in mind? How do we get governments to go along with such recommendations? It's kind of a mishmash of questions, but you see they kind of revolve around a theme. I think, Femke, you haven't spoken yet in this discussion. Do you want to answer that? Do you have an answer?
Thanks, Brooke. I think what's specific about the macaques is the socialization. Yeah, so it's so important to form these stable groups. And just to release a few individuals, it's not gonna work. And yeah, the guidelines that we follow are basically just a mix and match of everything we could find and throughout the years, and based on studies, based on our own experience. And yeah, we now have a SOP, of course, to rehabilitate and release the macaques. And I hope that we can extend and keep sharing and keep improving this together with others that are also working in the field of macaque rehabilitation, because there's still so much to learn. But yeah, we of course work closely with the government, and in Indonesia, the government has actually entrusted us for all the macaque issues, which is sometimes yeah, a bit of a, you know, hard to deal with, because it's, you know, the macaques are everywhere in conflict situations. They're still being kept as pets, and we never encountered like releases of macaques that were done on, let's say, not following any sort of protocol. And I think it's because the authorities also realized that they could do a lot of damage after the release and it could backfire at them. So all the releases that I know of where macaques were rehabilitated and released have always involved the authorities, and we assist with many of them, or most of them. Yeah, then, you know, there's just a few organizations that work on macaque rehabilitation here. So there's IAR, of course, that also follow yeah, their own built rehabilitation protocol that just, you know, throughout the years, based on experience and the same, we just, you know, we made these protocols. So yeah, with other primates, we often see the authorities doing these releases, you know, like infant gibbons, or where the authorities thinks like, okay, this is not going to backfire at us. It's quite easy to get, you know, to release these primates. And then we have a beautiful photo shoot. With the macaques, we never experienced this, but with other primates, we do. And it's a big, big problem that sadly we are seeing. So it's sad because we see like there's a good protocol for the gibbons that has, like Susan explained, it's been formulated also by Indonesian government officials. It's been years of work, and yet there's always these few individuals that you know, within the authorities that feel like on a special day like World Wildlife Day, they need to release some primates, and that's what they do for the photo moment, which is horrific, you know. And we've seen that now increasing. It's becoming like a trend, a young bear or a young, and then they take photos and they go. With the macaques, we've never seen that. No, I hope this sort of answers, you know, the question.
Yeah. Does anybody here want to follow up on that, to continue on that same theme of working with governments to try to get, especially in context of obligatory releases? Has anybody else had any luck on that? If not, we can move on to a different question.
I'll go ahead. I don't have, maybe it's not specifically to that, but in terms of the Lao context, I think one of the issues that we face is that we just don't have the capacity to take the animals, which means that we have to say no, which then forces the government to take matters into their own hands, which means they release the animal. And that's no fault to them. They don't have a facility to keep this animal. And it's, yeah, so it's kind of an issue that we have to face. Usually, for sure, not every time, but a lot of times the government, if they do confiscate a macaque, they will contact us or maybe Free the Bears. and ask them if we can take it. At the moment, we just have to say no. And obviously that we hope that will change in the future. But I think for some animals, the government is happy to contact us and to be able to give us the animal and not release. But then it also just depends on awareness or where the government are. Sometimes they don't know about facilities that will take the macaques in terms of that we have the capacity to do it or did have the capacity. So it also just depends on the government, because sometimes you have like district officers or something in a province way somewhere far away, and maybe they don't know that us or Free the Bears exist, and so they just confiscate a macaque and they just toss it back in the forest. And then of course, usually the macaque comes back to the village and wreaks havoc or something. But yeah, I think the government would be open to it, because we do get a lot of times them to give us the macaques, specifically about macaques. But yeah, we'll see I think we'll see more once we have the opportunity and capacity to take them again, so.
Does anybody else want to carry on, or should we go to a question? Elliot, have you got a question to ask?
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is one from someone who's watching with us today. I would like to know, maybe not just from Sian, but Sian spoke on this issue, but from everyone, what are their experiences or recommendations regarding the listening aspect or collecting important qualitative data from local residents? You know, almost getting that social license to carry out these programs in those areas. Did you get permissions from people in local areas where you were releasing these animals, or have in the past, or to try and stem the issues where these animals may be recaught or hurt in the wild? Anyone can jump in if they know this one. Sorry.
Do you want me to answer that, or do you want somebody else want to? Okay, obviously there are ethical issues involved with collecting qualitative data as far as all data from people is concerned. And so what I would recommend is, if you're not experienced with doing it, if you know of a university that has an anthropology department, for example, you may find somebody who would be willing to help you there. As I said, on our resources page, we've got a new reading suggestions list, and there's quite a lot of information on there about the ethical aspects and how to do it aspects. But I mean, it's basically listening is what we should be doing every day anyway. And really listening and hearing what people are saying. And what you will find probably, and what I've found in my experience, is that people will return to the same sorts of themes. And these don't have to be particularly formal interviews. You can just be chatting to people, you know, and if you're not planning to publish or do anything like that, you can gain a lot of information on how people view your project or perceive the animals and how they relate to the individual animals that you're, or the primates that you are working with, or other species, obviously. What I would suggest is, you know, there's a lot of talk about talking to people or informing people. Maybe think more about consulting people rather than giving them this kind of fait accompli, we're going to do this. Maybe put it in a way, frame it in a way that it's more of a consultation, so that they feel more involved. Not because you're not going to do it, but because you may experience less hassle and conflict afterwards, because people have felt more involved in what you're doing. When you talk to people, or when you hear people, maybe, because they're not necessarily going to say the things they really want to say to you, because you're a representative of your NGOs going forward with this. That's why you're probably better off getting somebody else in who doesn't have any relationship with the NGO or anybody else. And that's why I would recommend that you talk to an anthropological department and see if they've got somebody who could come out and look at the data and interpret it in a way that you can use it, that you can act on it. It's all, you know, very subjective qualitative data, but you know, in my experience, it works really well. If you take on board what people are saying, you can, if you're nimble as an organization, you can rapidly change your approach, you know, if necessary. And usually it is necessary in my experience. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, I think it does. Thank you very much
But
for that.
as I say, we've got a lot of information, reading suggestions and stuff like that.
Awesome.
We
Thank you very much. We'll direct people to those resources afterwards. Has anyone else here had experience in consulting communities around their release programs, whether it be education or getting that social license from our panel or experience from our panel? No, maybe not. Well, thank you very much for that input, Sian. I have another question that's following on from that. Oh, sorry, Susan.
Yeah, sorry.
Oh, sorry, Femke. Yeah.
Or Susan also?
Yeah, everyone can talk, just not at once.
Sorry, I couldn't find the hand thingy.
Yeah, I was looking for it too, and I was like this.
I know, sorry. I was just going to say with the gibbons, and there's still so much work to be done on this. Obviously, I say obviously, you may not know this. Every single country where there are gibbons, there are multiple local stories, myths, legends, artwork in some cases relating to gibbons. Now, very preliminary work. Obviously, myths and legends, cultural beliefs about gibbons in this case, some of them are just that. They're just stories that people tell. Some of them are, I don't know how to put my hand down. There we go. Some of them do seem to be still being used by people. I'm thinking particularly up in the Garo Hills of India, where these myths and legends are still influence how people behave on a day-to-day basis now, as in it protects the gibbons. Obviously, in many cases, that's not the situation. It's very uncertain how widespread that is. A project I hope, well, I have no money for, but hope to get some, is to really kind of not just document all of these myths and legends for, history, but to try and understand how if they're being used, or if they are just kind of a story that people know, or if they're actually a story that people use to determine how they behave towards gibbons. I'm not saying that's going to work with everything, but it is a way of bringing people in and also supporting the people's culture about these animals. So it may not work for every species, but it's maybe just an example that could work in some cases. So yeah, just an idea. Sorry, Femke. You can finish waving. So I've finished. Cheers.
Thanks, Susan. Yeah, I feel the same, like about the myth and legends. That's we use it not with the macaques. There's not many stories that people, it's different with gibbons or with orangutans, the men of the forest. Like there's a lot of stories that you can use and that you can search for that could help, the further protection of the species that you are releasing or you're working with. With the macaques, that's a little bit challenging, but then we focus on the habitat, like where are we releasing them in this forest? Are there any stories about this forest? Like we sort of do the same, like the island where we release them now, there's a lot of mythical stories about the island and why the forest is so important to protect and why the animals within are so important to protect. And that really helps. So we always, everywhere we work and where we run release projects, we work with the local community, and we at least have like school visits, and we engage with the local community in a positive way. And we try also to create educational booklets. I mean, Indonesia, it's challenging because there are so many different languages and so many different cultures. But for example, now in Karimun Jawa with the long-tailed macaque project, we're working on the protection of the long-tailed macaques there. And now we're making a booklet in Bahasa, Java, but in Karimun Jawa. So the local people will, it's nice, they feel, they read it and it's their language and it's about their animals. So we really try to find a connection there. And we always involve all the local people with our release projects. In a way that they could help in the field, or they can, so they also benefit from us being there. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anybody else, feel free to just jump in and speak at any point. We don't have to call on you, but if nobody else has to go. Elliot, were you about to ask a question, or shall I go?
You can go. More than welcome.
Well, I sort of was ready to ask one and then I've changed my mind about it. those of you who are actively doing releases, how and where did you find information to help you with your plans? Where did you start? And how did you reach the point where you thought, okay, well, we've read enough, we're just going to have to do it? And I'm going to ask Chiara, because you haven't spoken very much in this panel session, so I'm putting you on the spot now.
You point out exactly my problem. For me, there is never enough research. So at a certain point, when I read too much and I check every guideline possible, and I check the reference that each guideline is using. So I open each of those paper and each of those guideline or reference, and I end up reading paper from 1950. And then at that point, I realized that maybe I should stop researching and start writing. So I don't know where is the answer, because for me, there is never enough research. But yeah, for sure, I start with all the IUCN and the official website. And then I research whoever ever did the same thing that I want to do. So I go to any other rescue center and to check if they release the same animal. Maybe I contact them personally. And then I use like AI app, like a consensus order that help me filter through all the papers published about a different topic. Then I try to put together all the information that I found, and from there I use it as a like everlasting reference for what I write. But no, there is never a ending in researching.
That resonates with me a lot, sort of not knowing when to jump off or anything like that. So if anybody else can speak on that, that would be great. How do you get to the point where you actually jump off and do the thing? But working in a final sort of point for discussion, because we'll run out of time soon, into that is what stops you from actually going through with it? What it's clear that guidelines are guidelines, best practice is best practice. It's not always possible, but there have got to be a few really essential things that are in place. What would stop you from jumping off and actually starting to do the release work? Can anyone jump in and speak about that?
I think the main challenge here that we have to work with is the unknown, the lack of data. The fact that we are constantly, there is so much things that we don't know, starting from the interaction between that species or the big amount of pathogens or virus that the animal can have that we don't even thought about it, and we cannot even test because we don't have all the tests available for everything. So something that for real will stop you, will prevent you to do, is the fear that you don't know enough. And you need to find a compromise, because you will never know if the animal is going to be okay unless you follow him personally day and night. But we know that we cannot do it. And accidents always happen. And bad luck is hunting conservation world since forever. So yes, the unknown is our biggest problem when it's about acting. So there is always something that we will never know. There is something, a risk that we need to take, a leap in the void. So that for me is that the unknown.
Thank you. Susan.
Hi. Yeah, I completely agree with all of that. Something we put in the Gibbon guidelines as part of this decision-making tree is to try and help. And there are certain points where it says actually don't release. But actually, it's a little bit more fundamental than what Chiara was saying, which I completely agree with. But it was like, if you don't have a vet or even the ability to do basic blood tests, if you don't have a good enough structure the facilities to receive an animal where you can keep them in a safe condition. Because I think, you know, and again, this is going back, showing my age, 30 years ago, a lot of rescue centers were receiving animals into conditions that were not any better than when they were being kept as pets. And pushing too many animals into a small cage and saying, okay, well, they're in a rescue center, they're better, but actually their conditions were different, but not necessarily any better. So I think, you know, something that came out a few years ago about sustainability of sanctuaries by the Arcus Foundation, it's not actually about whether your center is green, it's about whether you have the capacity to maintain your center. You know, have you got enough money to feed the staff, pay the vet, feed the animals, pay the staff. And I think sometimes those, you know, and again, it has happened not just with gibbons, where centers have gone bankrupt because they haven't thought about that bigger pictures. I think unless you have that solid base, and I know we're all always having to find more money, but some of that again is, you know, I mean, again, very simply, even if you can't even do the basic blood tests, like, you know, and I know there's 20,000 million different diseases we could test for, but again, for the gibbons, we tried to do a what do you call it, like a risk assessment to assess which ones, okay, these were the ones you absolutely must test for, otherwise no release ever. And these are all the other ones we know about that you can test if for some reason you have endless money and access to facilities. But I think there's certain things like, if you can't test your animal for the basic diseases that we do know about, that's a big red flag. So again, sometimes the need for rescue centers, they often get set up, and I know many rescue centers simply don't have full-time vets. That's fine, but you do need to know that you can access a vet at some point to get these things done. But yeah, I think it is really important to know when to say no, and agreed completely that sometimes we just have to go, look, we've got the best information we have at the moment. We're doing our best. We just have to see how it works. So don't know if that quite helped, but yes, thanks.
I think that's a fantastic note to end on, is we just have to keep going and try to do the best. Thank you very much, everyone, today. Let me just share my final screen again. Oh, I can't find it. Yeah, we really want to thank everyone who's turned up today, all our speakers and everyone here joining today. It's fantastic to get so much of your experience from right across Asia and getting some international perspectives from other projects as well. So we really thank you for all your time and commitment here today. For everyone who's watching at home, and even for our speakers that we've had today, we would love to hear your feedback about this event. It means that we can make events into the future be more applicable to the challenges that you're all facing. So fill out that feedback form, and I think there is also a link, the QR form, you can take a picture of it. There's also a link going into the chat now for you all to fill out that form, which would be greatly appreciated. This was the first of our AfA Connect series. It'll be running right throughout 2024. So add all these really important dates for some more lessons that we're learning into the future. I think Susan just mentioned there, you know, one challenge for sanctuaries and rescue centers is not, you know, possible financial sustainability and planning like that. And that's a topic that we're going to be discussing later on into the year. So please join us for that. I should say all that information is available at asiaforanimals.com /AfA Connect. So you can find all that information there, and we'll email this information out afterwards to those who are interested. We have a database of events, not just our own events, but events from right around Asia, where you can log on and see stuff that might be applicable to your work. So you can head to asiaforanimals.com /events. And if you want that information directly to your mailbox, there is a mailing list down the bottom that you can sign up for, which again, let me repeat it, asiaforanimals.com /mailing list, so you can get onto our mailing list there. We also have a few in-person events leading us through to the end of the year, such as Asia Farm Animal Day being hosted in Hanoi in October, and a few Farm Animal Coalition events being held in the Philippines and India towards the end of the year. And finally, we have also recently launched a brand new podcast at Asia for Animals. So when you're driving those long distances, releasing macaques into the middle of nowhere, if you've got internet access, or you can pre-download all these podcasts. We're covering things such as the pandemic treaty, which was a milestone in 2024. And we've got upcoming episodes looking at macaques on social media, dog and cat welfare in conflict zones, and the first episode of Asia's Wildlife Rescuers, What's a Civet and Why Should We Care? That is one that's coming up for World Civet Day this year. So finally, everyone, thank you so much again for joining. If you would like more information about our coalition, go to asiaforanimals.com, or you can contact myself or Brooke at our names at asiaforanimals.com to discuss any of the issues that we've talked about today. So again, thank you very, very much to everyone for joining us and sharing your insights. Brooke has something to say. I can see her waving.
I want to jump in and plug the first of the Macaque Coalition's podcasts, which is going out on Wednesday, because it features Udalak Bindhani, who works in northern India, studying macaques and the way they interact with people in a sort of semi-urban area. And I think that will be of a lot of interest to many people here. So particularly check out the podcast on Wednesday.
And I feel like I need to add the cliche line is you can find those podcasts wherever you listen to them. So they're on absolutely every now. To jump in and have a look at them. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining us here today. We'll catch you around. Bye.